Well, hi everyone. My name's Father Alex. I'm the Vicar of St Matthew's in Burnley. I'm the host of the Godcast, and I'm delighted to say that joining me on the Godcast today is Martine Oborne. Now, Martine is the Vicar of St Michael's, Elmwood Road, Chiswick. Is that right, Martine?
Correct, yes.
Yes, good. And you've been the Vicar there since 2012, I believe.
Yes, so about 11 years.
And you're also the chair of Watch, which could you just explain to people what that is, Martine?
Yes, Watch, Women and the Church. It's a national campaign group for equality for women in the Church of England. And it's sort of there to really raise awareness about discrimination. Things like, when churches will only appoint a male vicar or they won't have a female bishop. But also, 2/3 of the people who go to church in this country are women. And I see our role really is also, speaking out not just for women, but for all people who face discrimination in our church.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Well, we'll come back to that in a moment, Martine. First, a little bit about yourself, if that's all right, because I think people who tune into religious podcasts, one of the things that intrigues people is individual callings. Just tell us a bit about how you came to the priesthood. Was it a straightforward process, or did it catch you by surprise?
It was a really long journey, partly because of the problems that women have had in the past with their callings. So I was kind of one of those, kind of geeky spiritual kids who went to church, constantly reading my Bible and everything. And so I can really trace my calling back, I suppose, to time when I was at school, probably about 10, and the teacher was going around the room saying, what do you want to be when you grow up? And one guy was saying, oh, I want to be an astronaut, and I want to be the prime minister and what have you. And I said, oh, I want to be a vicar. And of course, everyone in the class fell about laughing. And then my teacher, she said to me in the kindest way possible, she said, yes, Martine, but you do know that they don't have women vicars, yeah? And then, of course, the class all fell about laughing even more. So that's really hilarious. So that was kind of my start. And so I put away those childish thoughts quite early on in life. I realized that was not going to happen. Went off, had a career in the city, and I actually really only came back to church to get my kids into a good church school. So that was how I ended back up in the pews when I was just in my early 30s, and we just started having our family. And I think I always look back now and think I was off. My guard wasn't up. I was a bit undefended when I went back to church, and I feel that God got in there and called me again to ministry, and I kind of started thinking. And then that was later. It was still only around about the time that women were being allowed to be priests, and I became a lay minister first, but the kind of calling had been there really for a long time. So it, came about that way, really.
Yeah, and were the frustrations there at that time when you returned to church? Did you see the inequality? Was it kind of making you scratch where it was itching?
Well, actually, I went to a really lovely church with a really diverse group of people in Islington, and they really encouraged me in my faith. And I just I guess I just immersed myself in the gospel, and I just didn't see the discrimination there. So I do remember one woman saying to me once after coffee, she said, Martine, I don't know why you do so much for the church. Don't you realize it's a really sexist organization? And I said, oh, I never really thought too much about that because I just don't see it in the gospel. Yeah. And I suppose really in what I'm doing, I think sometimes people think, oh, I'm really woke and liberal and whatever, but I think that my main problem with discrimination against women and discrimination against lots of other groups in the church is that for me, it's just so what I would call ungospel. I just feel that basically Jesus is saying, don't treat anyone as lesser or greater than yourself. And just want to see the church living that out, really.
Yeah. And once you'd gone back into church, Martine, and you'd joined that process, did you see any of that equality in the actual process? Did you kind of people going, oh, be careful, or, you know, do you really want to do this? Or were you very determined at that point to kind of make progress?
Well, I did start rubbing up against it. I was a little bit unaware of it, and how deep it was and how institutionalized it was at first. Because obviously, like, churches do tend to keep quiet about these things because they don't look very attractive. And there was a friend of mine who was also discerning a call to ministry, and she took me along to this theological college for an open day, and it was Oak Hill. Don't know if you've heard of Oak Hill. Anyway, I hadn't at the time. And in all my naivety, I went along to this, and I sat through a little lecture on Martin Luther. And I thought, oh, this is really interesting. And I really enjoy training. And then I had lunch, and I sat next to the principal. And he was really charming. And we had a nice conversation, interesting conversation. And then we're driving back. And my friend, she says to me, oh, you know, how'd it all go? And I'm musing about it. And then she said to me, you do realize that the principal doesn't believe that women should be ordained. And it just hit me like a sort of bombshell, really. I thought, what? And you know, then she kind of sat down with me over a cup of tea and explained to me, oh, she said, well, there are these two wings in the church, blah, 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 blah. And little by little, I began to educate myself. And as I kind of asked more questions, began to, you know, really understand how things were, yeah. And actually how difficult, you know, it was for women. I mean, at that time, obviously women couldn't be bishops, so they could be priests, but I hadn't realized that they had been, quotes, allowed to be priests, you know, not exactly on equal terms with men.
Yeah. It's probably just worth pointing out to people who might be watching or listening from maybe a non-Church of England perspective that there are theological colleges across the country and in various different traditions. And as Martine's explained, Oak Hill has got a bit of a reputation, or it certainly had a reputation. I don't know if that's still the case. Is it, Martine? Is it?
Well, I think that, and probably even then, it would have said that it would support women through ministry training. But nonetheless, you know, the principal then, and I don't know about now, but there's still, you know, a lot of people in the institution who didn't think that that was right. And so it's just the challenge of working with colleagues who, you know, don't really. I mean, I used to think to myself, I guess they must think that I'm deluded in my calling, yeah. But of course, you never talk about it because no one wants to talk about it, and you're supposed, and women are supposed to just like get on and just get on with it and proclaim the gospel, and that's the important thing, and don't worry about all this other stuff. But I think, you know, one of the other reasons why I feel passionate about this is because I feel it is so undermining of people's well-being when they're having to, you know, live with discrimination, even if people are not talking about it, even if people are being very nice. It's just kind of, it's still there. And
it's interesting, isn't it? Because I suppose on the one hand, there are these things that should have happened long ago, but they've in more recent times become more celebrated, like the ordination of women, like female bishops. They are things to be clearly celebrated. But against that, I suppose there's the tension. Well, it should have happened years ago. When can you remember the first time you actually became somewhat of an activist, Martine? You started speaking into it rather than, you know, maybe pondering it and reflecting on it as an individual.
Yeah, I mean, it would be probably around about when I started my curacy, so around like 2009, and it was in the run up to the whole women bishops debates at General Synod, and I opened a Twitter account called at Mrs. Mitre, and Mrs. Mitre became a little character that was banging on about, why we need women bishops and whatever. And so she became quite vocal, and I started to get a little bit more involved. But I was pretty much on the sidelines. I wasn't a member of General Synod, so I didn't really have a voice. But I'd sort of get together with like-minded folk, and we pray about it a lot. I do remember my training incumbent. I had a wonderful training incumbent, and we got on incredibly well, and we still meet up. We're still really good friends. And there was only one time when he was a bit cross with me, and that was because it was the night before the Diocese of London. I think it was November 2012. And they were voting in all the dioceses, about women bishops, the legislation for women bishops. And I had a few friends. We wanted to go to St Paul's and sit on the steps with our little candles and things and pray for that vote. And this meant missing POT, like post-ordination training, or some kind of I don't know, meeting that we had to go to as curates. And I said, look, I'm not going to this POT. I'm going to go to St Paul's and pray with my friends about this. And he didn't really quite get it, but he did later. But, at first he didn't really get it because it was just so important to me. It just felt so important. And, to have a diocese, your diocese, and be working with colleagues who really didn't think that you had a genuine calling was really hard. And so so I guess that was when I first started getting more involved as an activist, and trying to by having the courage to speak out myself. I mean, one of the things I really hope to do is to just encourage others to have that courage too, because I think a lot of people are very scared to speak out, and so this is a problem.
Why do you think that is, Martine? I mean, because I'm on General Synod, and when I put myself forward for it, I was very clear what I was. I wanted to remove any ambiguity about what I was and where my kind of lines in the sand were, and what I theologically accepted and didn't accept. But I absolutely agree with you. I think there is almost an apathy to speak out, isn't there? Is that fear of the consequences, do you think? Is it the culture that we've created? What do you think that is?
Yeah, it's a really dangerous culture, isn't it? And I think it's part of the whole problem that we're struggling with deference in the church, that there's a natural culture of deference. Father knows best, that sort of thing. And so people generally, both lay and ordained, nervous about speaking out. Obviously, the way appointments are made, it's very difficult. I do know women who have spoken out in the church and been told that they're sort of shouty, or just for expressing concerns about something, or being labeled feminist, and so that's a really terrible thing. And obviously people are worried about their next appointment. Who's going to make their next appointment is their bishop. They've got to be on the right side of their bishop and their archdeacon. So people are quite compromised. And also, I mean, as women, we want to be nice. I mean, we've been taught to be nice, and we want people to like us and all that sort of thing. And so it's scary to, step outside the comfort zone. But what happens then is all sorts of things. I mean, not only does injustice, I'd say, continue, but all kinds of unsafe things as well, where stuff is being covered up. And the trouble is that the way that we have what is institutional discrimination, i.e. the ability to discriminate legally. I mean, we rely on exemptions under the Equality Act to do that, which is bad enough. But this also feeds and legitimizes sexism, which is just, you know, how women get treated generally. And yeah, I think it's a real problem. But it's not, I mean, it's not just women that are facing discrimination, and so I do realize that, you know, there are many other people in many other ways who are also perhaps finding it hard to speak out too.
Yeah, I think what you said there is important, because I don't think what you said is only applicable to women. I think that applies to men as well, and theological traditions as well. Something I want to ask you, Martine, is that this is a constant struggle for me, and maybe you can help me with a little bit more wisdom than I have. Is that, you know, I think what you've said so far is really interesting, because when people often when ordinands go into their training, obviously that is a time of formation and a period of understanding, but not everybody are cradle Christians. You know, I came to church later in life and stepped into this huge institution, and all the things that you've described I can really relate to. But what I do, what I've come to a position over a period of years is that you know, the Anglican Church is one big umbrella, and I'd like to think I'm pretty inclusive. I try to be as inclusive as I possibly can be. So that leads me to a place where I feel that to be truly inclusive, I have to not only welcome those I support. You know, I'm a liberal Catholic, but I have to make room for those who I may fundamentally disagree with and may have a different theology. And being in the Diocese of Blackburn, you will understand where I'm coming from. And I knew that going into ordination, and I know that post ordination. So people may argue, well, it's a bit late to start saying it's not fair and there's an inequality. Just wondering what your thoughts are on what I've said there, Martine.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, like you, that I love about the Anglican Church, it is a broad church. I would totally agree with you there. The thing is, there have to be limits to what your theology is as a church. And I mean, for example, there is a theology that, you know, supports racism and slavery, and, you know, can be argued from the Bible that these things are right. And we don't say, oh, well, you know, that's an interesting theological position, I respect that, and that's okay. You know, we have to actually set some limits. And I think that if we're in a situation where, because of our theology, we're not in communion with each other, you know, we don't all recognize each other's orders. Some of my colleagues wouldn't receive communion that I'd consecrated. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't think we are one church. I think this is phony. It's bogus, really. It's a pretense that we're one church, when we don't all. A definition of church is that it's a community of priests who all recognize each other's orders and are in communion. I mean, I don't know quite how you define a church otherwise. So we're saying to women, oh yes, we fully accept that you are priests and bishops, but we fully accept that those who don't accept that you're priests and bishops, you know, are fine to think that, and let's all be happy about that. I mean, I'd like to say, yeah, that's great. I'd like to be able to say that, but it really diminishes me in my ministry. It's so hard. It's such a burden to carry. And I really care for all those women who are so sacrificially working so hard up and down the country, and they're having to put up, some of them, like in your diocese, with a bishop who doesn't think that the church had the authority to ordain them. And although he's really nice, and I accept that, you know, that's not really the point. And so I think that it's such a huge ask for women to bear that. If it was just also a period of time, so we said like, okay, well, we're going to work this way for 10 years or something, and then we're going to stop ordaining people who can't accept women priests and bishops. Well, yeah, we wouldn't, I wouldn't be doing this role at Watch then. But I think that I just think, well, one, as I've said before, it's ungospel. Two, it's really a hard ask for women, and it's very undermining of their well-being. And I think it sort of hobbles our church. And the only way, frankly, that we make it work is by hiding it, which is why, one of the things that Watch does is it says, okay, we'd like this not to be the situation, but given it is the situation, let's just be honest about it. Let's be transparent about it. Let's have churches say clearly on their websites, what their position is about the limits that they put on women's ministry. But no one wants to do that. Yeah. So it's kind of like the only way we make it work is pretending that it's not happening. And this is where I feel that women very much exploited. Right? The church likes to put lots of pictures of women in mitres on the front pages of newspapers, etc. But when they announce an appointment, like the nomination of Philip North as Bishop of Blackburn, nobody said, oh, and by the way, he's on the council of Forward in Faith and of the society, and he's a member of the Shrine of the Lady of Washington, and that he doesn't think that the church had the authority to ordain the female clergy who were under his oversight. So, there's a dishonesty as well, which is problematic.
So I've got the bells of opposition to what you've said ringing in my ears, and we're not the BBC, so we can say what we like. But I do just want to, in my mind, I'm now thinking, are you arguing for the breakup of the Church of England in its present form? Because if you're arguing that there should be an end to those who will only that priests should only be men, that's what you're effectively arguing, is it?
Well, I think that. I mean, I don't want anyone to leave the Church of England. And people are constantly saying this to me, like, oh, but if we change things, then, this person or that person would have to leave. Well, maybe that would be the case, maybe not. But what about all the people? What about all the people who have either left or not joined the church because of perceived sexism and homophobia? I mean, I think there's a whole generation of people. I mean, I was talking with a bishop the other day saying, oh, how can we grow younger? Let's come up with some ideas. And some of my colleagues were saying, oh, let's have more hot chocolate after the services. And I said, well, let's give up our exemptions under the UK Equalities Act, because I think we're doing our young people a disservice. They're not idiots who are going to be sucked into church by giving them hot chocolate and playing football with them. They care about human rights, and they care about how we're treating women and LGBT people in our church. And, I think that we have to think about those people, the people who've left, the people who are not joining. And it's not that, I want anyone to leave, but to appoint someone as a diocesan bishop who doesn't fully recognize all the orders of his clergy is unacceptable, I think. That's my feeling.
Yeah. I'll come back to Bishop North in a second, but
I don't want to really stray onto that,
That's
because
fine. I'm happy, I want to talk about that, but I also want to talk about the point you've just said there about what about the people that have left and the people that aren't coming. I think that is the complete. That's where I absolutely support and get what you're saying and totally agree. I mean, we are probably the biggest turnoff at the moment, aren't we? Because of how we're perceived or how we look. You know, they've got this safeguarding stuff raging in the background at the moment. It seems to be one kind of nail in the coffin after the other, a continual, perpetual behavior that just turns people off to the church. That is that group of people, and that is why the church is in such decline. But on the other side, we have got this group of people that are still here with us, and I have so much respect and support for what you're saying, but you said that you wouldn't want people to leave, but that's what would happen, isn't it? I suppose
I don't know, Alex. You know, when
people said we're now no longer going to ordain women, well, the women priests would leave, wouldn't they?
Lots of people threaten to leave. I mean, it's so exhausting, you know, this argument, isn't it? But I mean, as I understand it, when the whole debate about should we ordain women as priests, going back to the 1990s, was going on, loads of people were threatening to leave the church if the church decided to ordain women. And actually, in the end, hardly any people left at all. And I just think, I mean, should we be held to ransom in that way? Don't we have to decide whether we are a church that ordains women or not? Full stop. I mean, you know, the Roman Catholic Church has decided they don't ordain women. It's clear. Fine. I get it. I respect that. I don't have an issue with it. I think there's more of an issue about the established church and you know, relying on exemptions from the Equalities Act, but that's another matter. But we can't have, I don't think that we can have it both ways forever. And actually, when you look at about over half now, I think, of provinces in the Anglican Communion have now decided to ordain women as priests and bishops. And we are the only one who's done this sort of fudge of saying yes, but also no. They've decided, some of them have not decided, and they remain closed to women as ministers. But at least, you know, at least there's equality, you know, in the ones that have gone ahead, there is a real equality with men in ministry. And so I don't know, I think that is it sustainable forever, this sort of situation? It becomes ever more complicated because also it's not just about women, it's about men who've been ordained by women as well, because they're off limits too. I was talking this morning with someone, you know, who's struggling, you know, a licensed lay minister in a parish where, you know, her vicar, you know, he hasn't even left yet, he's retiring, but he's trying to shove through a motion to get a resolution through to stop, you know, women applying for the position in the future. And I was saying, you know, that there are quite a lot of men that, you know, forward in faith society church won't accept either. And I just see it's not only unjust, but it's an absolutely horrible mess that we're getting ourselves into. And heaven help us if we do something similar on the LGBT front. It's not a sustainable way of going forward in the long term.
Yeah, and you will have seen Philip North's article for Via Media News around conscience, because you responded to it, and I thought it was quite a thought-provoking piece by Bishop Philip, and I thought yours was equally thought-provoking. But you did suggest that you were concerned that people conscience is a disguise for bigotry. Do you believe that to be true?
I think it can be used in that way. I mean, you know, this whole thing about passing resolutions in parishes about where, you know, you're supposed to only pass a resolution to say you won't have a woman vicar if this is the theological conviction of the parish, and yet Forward in Faith puts out its guidance saying, oh, actually, you can do this for the sake of unity, because, everyone can accept a man, but, not everyone can accept a woman. So if there's just a tiny number of people who don't accept women, then you should pass this resolution for the sake of unity. Well, I mean, that's not what was intended. And so I think that language is being used to really disguise this bigotry. I mean, I had, I'm actually an area dean, and I was having a cup of coffee with a society priest the other day. And I said to him, so how is it that you can't accept that I'm a priest? And he said, oh, do we have to talk about that? Oh, I can't even remember the reasons now. I said, let me prompt you then. Anything about apostolic succession or Roman Catholic Church? I said, oh, he said, well, yes, he said, I guess those were the reasons, he said. But frankly, I just think men make better leaders. And just what, so really on paper, he has his theological reasons why he has his position, but he feels legitimized in the way that we have this structure to just casually say, do you know what, I think men do a better job. And so this is what I mean, that these phrases are being used, really to cover up quite a lot of prejudice.
I want to talk about my diocese, because I'm part of it, and I've wrestled with some of the things you've talked about for a long time and continue to wrestle with them. But what I would say is that I've been a General Synod rep for about 18 months. I was part of the appointment process for Bishop Philip. I never received any objections from anybody, not from one single person, in my capacity as General Synod rep. And as I'm not intricately involved with the diocese, but from what I see, I do see a diocese of men, women, gay priests who support Philip, who are delighted that he's now our Bishop of Blackburn. I've wrestled with that, but I have to say that he has my support, and I just want to explain why, and be interested in your response. So I support his role, because my hope and prayer is that he and our diocese could be a good example of mutual flourishing, where people of different theological positions and different conscience, or whatever you want to call it, can work together. And I think there is potential for that to happen. And I think with that in mind, that is potentially a framework for a step forward in terms of living in love and faith. We've got some huge, as I said earlier, we seem to go from one crisis to the next. And we are, I was part of that debate in Synod, and it was deeply stressful and hurtful and upsetting for everybody. But if we are to survive, if we are to kind of rebuild and go again and do what I want to do, is, my mum went to see my mum yesterday, and she said to me, God, these politicians, what do you think the answer is? And I just said, Jesus. And I fundamentally believe that, that Jesus is the answer to that. And all the stuff that we talk about gets in the way of Jesus. So I suppose there's two questions. I wonder what you think about what I've just said, but I also wonder what you think Jesus would make of all this in this debate and argument about human sexuality and men versus women, traditional theology against conservative, against charismatic.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Alex. Well, I don't want to get dragged into talking too much about Blackburn, because I'm here in London, I'm not up there with you, and I respect the process that you've gone through, etc. I just may say a couple of things. I do think, well, I know that there are clergy with concerns about the appointment, and that they have been afraid to speak out. So I know that. And yeah, some of them have been put under pressure not to say anything. And some of them, yeah, well, anyway, probably best I say no more about that here. But there are definitely people who have concerns, who have not felt able to express those concerns. So that's one thing. I think the other thing is that there are women who would not come take a post in Blackburn in these situations. I'm one of them. I couldn't have a bishop overseeing me who was happy for me to consecrate the bread and wine for my congregation, think it's good enough for them, but it wouldn't be good enough for him. I couldn't do that. I couldn't. And I think there are many women who, obviously there are women who are willing to work alongside that and make that work. But, I was having a conversation with a bishop in Chichester, and I wonder how much you looked at Chichester when you were thinking about the appointment of Philip North, because this person was saying to me, because I was asking what the latest stats were about, how percentages of stipendiary posts held by women, which are very low in Chichester and also very low in Blackburn, bottom of the league table there. This person was saying, we're working so hard, and Martin Warner, he's such a nice man, and we're really trying to attract women, and I said, well, I said, so are these figures going up? And she said, well, no, they're not. And I said, that is probably because people like myself and other women will not go and work in Chichester in that. And I hope I'm wrong, but you may find that's the case in Blackburn. And I think that, considering the example of Chichester, the only other diocese with a bishop that doesn't fully accept the ordination of women, it tells us something. Anyway, I don't want to get drawn down too much into that. We are where we are there. I think it's very unfortunate. I think it's going to be quite a struggle to really affirm women in Blackburn in the situation you're now in. I think it's going to be a real struggle, and that's a pity.
I agree as it is, but I think if the right appointment to the Bishop of Burnley role is well considered, then then there are opportunities for difference and bishops with difference.
Thinking about what you said about Jesus is interesting. I went and there was a get together at St Martin in the Fields the night before General Synod in February, and I went along. Did you go along to that?
I was there, yeah.
Okay, so I went along to that. I'm not a member of General Synod, but I went along kind of with my watch hat on, and with my watch colleagues, who are on General Synod. And I guess when I became chair of Watch, which was only last October, I thought, crikey, I just don't have the bandwidth to do more than speak out on the women's issue. I can't get dragged into everything else. But I found it's really impossible. And if I'm going to speak out about discrimination against women, then I have to speak out against discrimination in general. And it really came home to me that night at St Martin in the Fields. And I was sitting there in that church with, I don't know, several hundred people. LGBT people. And it just, the kind of brokenness and pain that was around me that I became aware of was really, very moving. And I felt like here is a sort of gathering of almost like the lowest of the low, all the people who have been shoved to the bottom of the pile by the Church of England. It's a kind of detritus, people who've been made to feel so much lesser, all of them pushed down, whether because they're gay, people of color, disabled,
working class,
women, whatever. They've been pushed down, made to feel lesser. And I just thought, this is where Jesus is. I just felt Jesus is here with all these broken people put down, not with all the straight, white, able-bodied, middle-class men. Sorry, but no, Jesus was there in that church that night with all the people, all these kind of motley looking crowd that for whatever reason have been found unacceptable. So yeah, I'm pretty clear. It feels, I just can't, how can you read the gospel and think anything else? That Jesus doesn't want to see equality in his church. Very interesting. I read a really interesting book. I've got to write a review for it. Where is it? I read a really interesting book a couple of months ago called The Forgotten Creed by Stephen Patterson. I'm going to give a quick plug for it. It's really interesting because in this book, he argues that Galatians 3:28, in Christ, there is no Jew nor Greek, no slave nor free, no male nor female. He argues that this was probably an early creed, an early baptismal creed. It's very interesting analysis that he does in it. And it doesn't surprise me because this is the heart of the gospel. The thing that Jesus goes on and on about is in the kingdom of God, there's no first, there's no last. And, we seem to have lost that. We seem to have become very pharisaical, as I said in my piece on Via Media. And, I think that if we really reflected the image of God, both male and female, in all its wonderful diversity, I think, that the church would be so attractive, an exciting place to be. And we're really hobbling ourselves by, just not living it out.
Well, I think we can both agree on that, definitely. Martine, it's been really fascinating chatting to you, getting an insight about your own ministry and the things that matter to you. So thank you so much for coming on the Godcast. Thank you to those who've watched and listened, and you'll find more interviews like this and others by simply Googling the Godcast. But for now, Martine, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Really enjoyed it. Thanks so much, Alex.